Sorry guys, that was my attempt at my quirky intro. I've been working out a new one and it's not quite ready yet, so I figured until I get that ready and revamp all the things I want to revamp for my channel, I'm gonna just make quirky kind of musical notes myself and just kind of sing the intro I've been using this whole time. I'm not going to be putting it in the How to Play series. I might use it for other stuff still, but I thought it'd just be kind of funny if I was to just sing it for this series. So welcome to any of the new players that are here at my channel. For anyone that's still watching, that's been following all my work, I guess you can call it, or videos, whatever you want to refer to it as. This is going to be a How to Play series for Force of Will. It's going to be broken down in 5 videos. I'm starting off today with card types. It'll kind of cover cost and everything like that. I don't want to go into any specifics with activates. There is a little kind of brief video I'm going to do tomorrow about activates and enters themselves, but today will just be strictly about card types. So as a new player, how to understand what the different card types are, how to properly play them and properly use them in certain situations of the game, when you can use them in certain areas of the game. And I'll go further into activates and enters tomorrow, with 3 more videos coming after that for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That'll cover a bunch of other topics for anyone starting the game. And I really do urge anyone to ask me any questions if you do have them. I'm going to be paying really close attention to anything I miss in these videos because I don't want anyone to not be able to fully learn everything after this week. So please feel free to ask any questions at the end. It would mean a lot to me. I'm not really one to do how to plays very often, so this is kind of a learning experience for me as well. And yeah, let me break down the card types starting now. So starting off with the most common card type you have to decide first is your ruler. Rulers are cards that either have 2 sides or 1 side. In Grimm's case, you can't J-activate him. Another example is Puss in Boots, who has a J-ruler and a ruler side. So the other side of Puss in Boots is obviously a card you can J-activate to. And an example of a J-activated ruler is Dracula. So Alucard is the other side to this. I can actually show you guys that as well. So a ruler has 2 sides. So there's Alucard the Dark Noble, and Dracula is his J-ruler side. A J-ruler goes into the field as pretty much a resonator, but cards that affect resonators will not affect J-rulers unless it specifies J/resonator. So for an example, a card like Thunder can hit a J-ruler because it specifies 500 damage direct or 2 J/resonator. But a card like Stoning to Death would not be able to destroy Dracula. So another thing to note is, I'm going to mention this because I know it's actually asked very often. To J-activate, every card has a different cost. For example, Puss in Boots over here says pay 9. If you control Athos, you pay 3 less, and then Aramis and Porthos also make them cost 3 less. So eventually, if you have all 3, you can J-activate him for 0. Mind that because this is a gray kind of faded circle and it isn't actually a specific like attribute like light, that only affects the colorless cost of cards, which I'll get into later. As you can see, it also says you may pay 1 less to play Musketeers, and I'll kind of show that off in a bit. But what I want to say, I did mention I'm not going to go into activates, but I've seen a lot of new players do this, so I want to make sure you know this. For Grimm's activate, it says pay 1, discard a Fairy Tale Resonator. Search your main deck for a Fairy Tale Resonator, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your main deck. This ability can only be played once per turn. An activate ability that does not require you to rest, the way you can see here with the target resonator gains 0/-300 until end of turn, means you can still tap for a magic stone. So going into what a ruler can do every turn, you can of course rest your ruler for a magic stone, which you get from your magic stone area, or you can J-activate, or in the case of a ruler like Dracula, you can use your tap ability instead of calling a stone or J-activating. So you know, if they have a monster and you want to get rid of it, you can of course do -300 to it, and that might be enough to kill it. Let's say if it's like a Gretel, and but you wouldn't be able to call for a stone at this point. The only workaround to this, and this is going to be very confusing to a lot of people, so please, I'll further explain this in activates, and maybe if I do a chase video of how chases work, which I'm mostly planning on doing. But to make this clear, J-activating goes into the chase, and an activate ability can also go into a chase. So essentially, if you have Dracula recovered, it's your turn. You met the requirements to J-activate, which is controlling a vampire and sending a card your opponent controls to the graveyard. Let's say they have an Elvish Priest and a Gretel, and you had thundered their Gretel, and you control Allura, the Blood Speaker, which is a vampire. You can now J-activate. If you wanted to, you can J-activate. To your J-activate going into the chase, you're allowed to then activate Alucard's ability to do minus 300. So what would happen is you declare J-activate, J-activating goes into the chase. You then chase your own J-activate with the activate ability to tap and do minus 300. So what happens is Dracula would enter the field rested, and Gretel would gain 0 minus 300 and it would die. So note that this happens with a lot of different rulers. Lumia, for example, her sacred Princess of Guidance side, her ruler side, says you can tap to gain 300 life. You can essentially J-activate and chase the 300 life gain. She would come into the field rested and you would gain 300 life. So this doesn't apply to all rulers. For example, Puss in Boots does not have an activate ability. You can do that with activate abilities that also don't specify resting, and it would just come in recovered. I can't think of any that they are like that, but let's say if Grimm did have a J-activated ability, you could essentially J-activate and then pay to discard cards to search a fairy tale, and then you would enter recovered and get a fairy tale. So just make sure that you can essentially use a recovered, you can use an activated ability on your ruler in response to you J-activating, and that's the only workaround to being able to do 2 of those effects in one turn. But there is no circumstance, unless the card says on enter you get a magic stone, where you can get a magic stone and J-activate in the same turn. It's possible that Swiftness says you can use a rest ability the turn you enter the field, or you don't have summoning sickness essentially. Even if your ruler was to have swiftness, you can't J-activate and tap for a stone. It doesn't. There's only one major play you can make every turn, and it's either call a stone or J-activate. That is what your ruler is for, and there's no workaround to that other than the whole come and rested thing I mentioned earlier. And another note is, like I was mentioning for Puss in Boots, where it says you may pay 1 less for Musketeers. If you look at Athos, Athos costs 2 green and 2 colorless. This only affects the colorless cost. Please make sure that any card you notice, if it makes it cost less with the actual color, it will specify a picture of the color. Never assume that you can pay 1 green and 2 colorless for this. It will always be 2 green and 1 colorless if you're using Puss in Boots. The colors are very specific because it's just grayed out. It means the colorless cost. And yeah, so that's kind of just a breakdown for rulers. For Resonators, I kind of have a breakdown of a lot of different effects as well. We have Athos the Musketeer, the 3 Musketeers, which on enter searches your deck for an addition and equips it onto himself if you control Puss in Boots. If you don't, it will go to your deck. Note that when a ruler or J-ruler is destroyed, of course rulers can't really be destroyed, but if your J-ruler, let's say if you have Puss in Boots J-activated, so let me just flip him over real quick, and somebody uses Flame of the Outer World and kills this. When a J-ruler is destroyed, it goes to your J-ruler slot. If it was recovered, it stays recovered. If it was rested, it stays rested. And it stays on the J-ruler side. A lot of people think that you flip it back, but you don't. A J-ruler that is destroyed stays on the J-ruler side, unless it of course has imperishable, in which you can bring it back, and it goes on the ruler side. But a J-ruler that's destroyed goes into this side and becomes an astral ruler, which means its type, name, and everything is erased, and it just stays there as an astral ruler. So if you have Puss in Boots destroyed as your J-ruler, this now will always cost 4, and any card that says like if you control Puss in Boots as your ruler or anything like that will not apply. So another example is Christie. She says Silver Bullet says if you have Christie or Helsing as your ruler, this costs only 1. If your Christie was destroyed, you would have to pay the full 2 card cost for this card. It doesn't have the name of the ruler anymore once it's destroyed. So that's an example of Resonators that have enters or lowered cost. Another thing I wanted to show is a card like Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell says continuous. This card gains 200 for each fairy tale you control. Because it doesn't say every other fairy tale you control, it applies immediately to itself. So 1 Tinkerbell as the only fairy tale on your field is immediately 2/2. And then another ruling that a lot of people don't know is, let's say if you play Tinkerbell and your ruler, not your J-ruler, but your ruler is Puss in Boots, it applies to the J-ruler if, I believe it's still a fairy tale. Let me see. Yeah, it's still a fairy tale, so it would apply too, but most people don't know this for our actual ruler. If you play Tinkerbell and Puss in Boots is your ruler, this actually is 4/4. it checks the field for any fairy tale, and you control your ruler, so it still counts. This also affects Wise Men of Winds. It's an elf that says on enter, if you don't control another elf, destroy this card. If your ruler is Christie and you control no other elf, it would still not be destroyed. It makes sure to check for any card that's face up on the field essentially, and Puss in Boots counts. The only time this isn't applied is if Jan, Nameless Girl, the ruler, enters the field. It says destroy all humans. You would not destroy a human ruler, because to destroy a ruler you would technically need a card that says target ruler, which we don't have and I don't think we're ever going to get. But that's the only ruling that doesn't apply to your ruler, is if Joan destroys all humans on the field, you would not destroy your human ruler. It would destroy a human J ruler, but it would not destroy a human ruler. So although this affects each other in the ruler zone, destroying all of one type on the field would not. So, and then I also want to note that for newer players that maybe got into the sets a little late, this says continuous. This card gains 200 for every fairy tale. And then we have Grim, the heroic king of aspiration. It says other light resonators you control gain 200. This is also a continuous effect. Force of Will just kind of stopped trying to show specifically like all this continuous or enter. Well, not enter's still a thing, but they kind of try to clean up the card. Activates aren't really there anymore. But mind you, if a card is like pay this to do this, that is always an activate. So a card like Glimpse of Kaguya will work. And I'll go more into that tomorrow with activates. But I just wanted everyone to make sure that a card like Grim and a card like Tinkerbell are exactly the same. These are both continuous effects. The only reason it says so on this is because it's an old card when they kind of had older rulings. And then when they came to newer cards, they were kind of like, okay, well, we're not going to bother putting continuous on it. You'll know if it's a continuous effect because it pretty much just sounds like one. So these are exactly the same. But always remember, see, because it says other light resonators you control gain 2/2, this wouldn't affect itself. Whereas Tinkerbell says this card gains 2/2 for each fairy tale you control, which means it checks itself. So other type of resonators we have are incarnate resonators. So as you can see, Able is a 7/7. It says incarnation 2 light, and then in parentheses it says you may banish 2 light resonators rather than pay this card's cost. So this does mean you can pay the awakening right away. And the rulings actually aren't too clear on awakening, because I think of it like a translation barrier. When you're playing a card, you always have to play the awakening cost immediately while the card is still in the chase, and not after it's resolved. It says so the other way in the rulings, but that's totally incorrect. It might have been updated. I might be mistaken if it still says that. But if you're playing a card with awakening, whether or not you want to just pay 7 to drop this and destroy all cards on field, or if you want to incarnate, the awakening cost must be paid upon activation. So the way the incarnate works with the awakening for this card, for example, is you have 2 light resonators, you sack them essentially to drop Able, and then you pay the 4 cost for awakening. This is all essentially done all in one move. It wouldn't be like you drop Able and they're like, okay, it's fine, and then you pay the cost. You pretty much sack, drop Ables, declare you're going to pay 4 for the awakening, and then they are allowed to either Zeeks or cancel the summon or anyway. But yeah, so to play an incarnate, you have to pretty much tribute kind of the way you do in Yu-Gi-Oh! For the cost that it's asking for, so 2 lights in Abel's case. And then you play the awakening cost, which is 2 light and 2 colorless. So essentially you can sack 2 light resonators, pay 4, and destroy all resonators other than Able on the field. So that's always a really good workaround. So incarnate is essentially tributing. I'd also like to specify in this moment that banish means to send to grave. It's essentially tributing or sacrificing your resonator, depending on what game you're familiar with, but it does not mean to remove from game. Remove from game for an effect like Lumia the Resonator will specify removed from game. Banish isn't like Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it means out of the game. It specifically just means to tribute. So if you use a card that says banish this resonator, blah, 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 you would send it to the graveyard and then gain the blah, blah, blah effect. And then lastly, another resonator I thought could kind of clear up a lot of things is a card like Blazer. To make Blazer short, it pretty much means if a card would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, remove it from the game instead. So if they discard a card, send a card from the deck to the graveyard, everything just gets removed from the game. There's a ruling in Force of Will that kind of just easiest understood as last known information. If a card is removed from the field, everything that applied to that card while it was on the field still applies, which is very different from Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're coming from Yu-Gi-Oh! If you, for example, attack a giant rat in Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's sent to the graveyard, and then its effect activates in the grave, and you gain the effect because, you know, even if it was negated on the field, it dies and now it's activating in the grave, so it's no longer negated. That's not how Forcible works. If you negate Blazer and destroy it, it goes to the graveyard. It won't get banished. Whereas if you Stoning to Death Blazer, because the last known information was his continuous effect was on the field, he will get removed, and every turn you can just keep bringing him back. The only workaround to Blazer is negating him and then destroying him, or Zexing his summon or canceling his summon somehow, and making sure that he just hits the grave right away. But if a card is on the field, for example, if you have 2 Grims and they're both 7/7 because they're buffing each other, if somebody tries to, if you have a card that says, if this card's removed from the field, gain life equal to the attack of the Resonator, and he's destroyed, you would gain 7, not 5. Whatever the condition on the field was when your Resonator was removed, or when whatever applies to your Resonator after it leaves the field, whatever the last known information about that card was is what you go off of. So if a card was buffed, if a card has a continuous effect like Blazer, it will always apply to that last effect rather than anything that might happen essentially because your card is now removed. It might have its original attack, blah blah blah. That's not how Forcible works. Whatever the last known information was is what you go off of. Moving on to spell chants, a spell chant example I have first is Spiral of Despair. The reason why I use this card is because it kind of meets a lot of requirements I've talked about so far. This card says your opponent discards 2 cards. If your if your ruler is Pandora Girl in the box, or your J ruler is Pandora of Light or Pandora of Dark, he or she discards 2 random cards instead. So remember, if you somehow have a dead Pandora of Light or Pandora of Dark, this would not discard random cards. A spell chant is used by paying the cost. The cost is 2 dark in this case, and you can only play this during your main phase. You can't do it during your draw like you could a spell chant instant, which I will get into. But this is essentially a card like Dark Hole in Yu-Gi-Oh! You just use it upon your turn. It's not a quick play. It's not a trap card where you can use it any faster. It's just a card you use during your turn, and you pay the full cost, and you get to gain the effect. This card says your opponent discards 2 cards. If they have 1 card in hand, they will discard 1 card. If you have a card that says banish a Resonator and your opponent discards a card and you don't have a Resonator, you can still use the card. The game isn't as technical as Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, for example. You just apply as much of the effect as you can. So if you use any card, and unless it's like a cost to do it where it says, you know, activate, banish a Resonator, blah blah blah, then you must meet that requirement. But because essentially you need it as the cost. But if a card's effect is to just do something, you just do as much of it as you can. And not to mention, I don't have a Seth with me on here. I should have probably prepared one, but I didn't think I'd need one. There's a card called Seth the Arbiter. It says every time your opponent wants to discard a card, you draw a card also. So if you use Spiral of Despair and you control a Seth, you would draw 2 cards if they discard 2 cards. There's no such thing as you discarded both of them at once, so it just counts as 1 application of discard. If I discard 7 cards from your hand and I have Seth on the field, I'm gonna draw 7 cards. It's not as technical as Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. A lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards will say monster and then in parentheses say monsters with an S, or cards. So this game isn't like that. If a card says discard 2 cards and they say Seth says draw a card for every card your opponent discards, you would draw 2. If you have Morgania on the field, which says every application of draw you were to gain, you can instead look at the top 3 cards of your deck, pick 1 and put the other 2 on the bottom, and you drop a Cheshire Cat. You would draw 3 cards, pick 1, put 2 on the bottom, draw 3 cards, pick 1, put 2 on the bottom, and then stack the card on top of your deck for Cheshire. So always make sure that you apply as much of an effect as you can, and in a case like a spell card like this that requires a specific ruler, if your J ruler was destroyed and is now an astral ruler, you do not gain the additional effect. So they would still discard 2 cards, but not at random. They would get the pick. And then moving on, there's another spell chant I wanted to talk about. This isn't a very used card, but I thought I'd just cover it. This card says search your main deck for a Moon Edition, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your main deck. You can Awakening to pay 2. You may put a Moon Edition from your hand into your field. So because you get to decide which effect goes in the chase first, you can essentially pay 3 to activate this card. both the effects go in the chase. So the awakening is in the chase that says put a moon edition from your hand into the field, and then the first effect is in the chase that says search your main deck for a card. So what would happen is you could essentially search the moon card and then drop that same moon card. A lot of people think that because it says you may put a moon edition from your hand into the field, if it activates at the same time, you can't because it wasn't in your hand before you used it. That's not how it works. You essentially just pay the full cost, choose which card effect goes in the chase. You decide to put the moon from your hand into the chase, into the field second in the chase. So you search the card, that resolves, putting it in the field resolves, and now you have the moon. So that was just to clarify kind of spell chants that have maybe awakening effects. We only have, I think this one is the only one I've seen so far. But yeah, when you have multiple effects on a card, you get to pick which order they kind of resolve in, so you gain all the effects as long as you've paid the appropriate cost. And remember, so because this is 2 colorless, you'd be able to pay 1 blue for sure for this cost, and an additional 2 cost, and you would have to pay all 3 of it up front. If it gets Cake Zone, you're tapped out on 3 stones. So that's it for spell chants. Moving on to Spellchant instance, I'm going to use Law of Silence as my first example. This card says target player cannot play normal spells and summon spells until end of turn. The only window, I'm going to talk about priority for a little bit. There is a mechanic in the game called priority. It's player priority. So the turn player cannot be interrupted by the opponent until they themselves play a card into the chase. The only time this isn't true is during the draw phase, where I have a window to example Law of Silence you, and then for the rest of your turn after recovery you won't be able to play. So of course the sequence for this game is draw, and then recover, and then it's your main phase and you would play the game normally. You can attack and then go back to summoning Resonators as much as you want. You can attack and then play chants. You can do as much during your turn as you can, but you only get 1 draw phase and 1 recovery. So there's a window open in the chase for me to add to before your main phase officially starts, so right before recovery. So I'm able to stun you for the turn, but other than that, let's say if you have a Cheshire Cat. Cheshire Cat, of course, says when it enters the field, you draw 2 cards and stack 1 on top of your deck. So if it's your turn and you play Cheshire Cat, when you pay 1 and you're about to drop Cheshire Cat enters the chase. I'm allowed to go, hey, I'm going to pay 1 red and thunder you direct, or thunder your other Resonator. But if your Cheshire Cat hits the field and fully resolves, you draw 2 and put 1 on top of your deck, and nothing else is happening, it just resolved. I can't just be like, tap 1, thunder you direct. You're not allowed to, and the only time you can is during the chase. So when it's your opponent's turn, every time they place a card into the chase, you're allowed to then add to the chase and respond to something. Or during the end phase, you're also allowed to, let's say, thunder something if you want, if nothing else is going on. So during the end phase and right before recovery or during draw. So during their main phase at any point, you're not allowed to do something just because you want to, even if it's a spell chant instant, which, like I said, could be played in any phase during either player's turn. You can even play a spell chant instant this way. Let's say if you have 2 open and you draw Law of Silence and you have 2 green. You can tap the 2 green to Law of Silence them and then recover and untap all of your stones, and now you got essentially a free Law of Silence because after untap you have all your magic stones recovered. So spell chant instants in general work that way. I wanted to use Law of Silence as one of the examples because it's sometimes really confusing to new players. Also note that normal spells and summon spells might also just be considered as spells. If a card says cancel target spell, it applies to both summon spells and normal spells, which includes any card in the game essentially. That includes Regalias, additions, field cards, everything in the chase is a spell. Although if a card like Cake Zone, which I will get to, says cancel normal spell, it only applies to cards that say spell, and summon spells only apply to cards that are Resonators. I don't know why this doesn't just say cannot play spells until end of turn. I don't know why it specifies normal spells and summon spells. They might have just wanted to make it clear and stop using spell for reference to everything. But it is if it specifies just spell, that does include both. And then the next card I want to talk about is Dream of Juliet, because a lot of people don't really understand the last effect of this card. It says or remove target Resonator from the game, then put it into the owner's field. Well, a Force of Will term, it might be a magic term, I'm not really sure where this originated, but the idea behind a card like this is used to flicker something. So if I have a Resonator and you try to Stony to death it, so it's gonna die, or you try to Thunder it. If I play Dream of Juliet, it leaves the field, Thunder or Stony to death misses, and then it enters the field again. Because you don't have a valid target anymore, it blinks my monster back out and in, and it avoids your spell. If a card has an enter effect, like let's say, let me grab this Athos. If I have Athos and I use Dream of Juliet to remove it and put it back into the field, it will not trigger the enter effect. Any card that specifies putting something in the field, unless it's like Fairy Tale where it says and then activate the enter ability, you will not get the enter ability again. Other than cards, which I don't have an example with here, but I was going to talk tomorrow about in activates and enters, which I will go again over tomorrow. But if a card says when this card enters and it doesn't have this enter symbol, it will activate with Dream of Juliet, because that just means if the card's put into the field essentially. But if it's an actual enter effect, cards that put cards into the field will not trigger it unless it specifies then activate the enter ability. So that's it for Dream of Juliet. And then like I mentioned with Cake Zone and the other one is Zeke's, if you read Cake Zone, it says cancel target normal spell, and one of the effects on Zeke's is cancel target summon spell. Cake Zone, that means can only stop any form of spell, which includes Regalias, instants, chants, anything that actually says spell on it and or Regalia. And Zeke stops Resonators only, so you can't use this on Cake Zone, and you could Cake Zone a Zeke's though. So make sure that Cake Zone or cancel anything that's a normal spell applies only to spells that are with spell on it, or pretty much magic cards in any other sense, or spell, chant, instance, summon spells only affect Resonators. So that's it for those kind of spells. And then another two examples I wanted to use with instance was Duel of Truth and Apollo Break. As you can see, Apollo Break is a dual colored cost. It's 1 yellow, 1 blue, which means a light and a water. It also has an awakening effect, so that's why I also picked this, because it's once again an awakening with a Spellchant instant. It says put target Resonator on top of the owner's deck, awakening if you play 2 moon additionally to this cost, so it would cost 4 light, blue, and 2 moon. Moon can also only be generated with 2 specific magic stones and a few cards in the game. It's really, it's mainly just for Kaguya, and a lot of people don't use moon cards, but I just thought I'd go over it just in case. It says if your J ruler is, the Kaguya, the new one that came out in NPR, you can put the Resonator on the bottom of the owner's deck instead and draw a card instead. So you would be able to play this card the way you would any card. You could pay the awakening on your, you activate the card, you pay the full 4 right away. So then if it gets Cake Zone, you do tap out on 4. And you would be able to put the card on the bottom of the owner's deck and draw a card if you have Kaguya. Once again, if Kaguya would happen to be destroyed, which she has imperishable, so you'd have to get rid of that first. But if it's fully dead and it's an Astral Ruler, you would not be able to do the awakening at all. Or you would, but it wouldn't, let me see, if your J ruler is, or... No, actually no, you wouldn't be able to pay the awakening at all. So you note that an effect like this that applies to a lot of different things. First of all, dual cost. Second of all, it's an instant, so you can use it whenever. The awakening on it, the specific ruler, all of that applies to all the things we've learned so far. And also to note, because a card like this also says and draw a card instead, if your opponent wants to use something like Zeke's, and one of Zeke's effects is to give something kind of like immunity to spell or targeting for the turn. If you try to summon something like a Carmilla and you try to let's say, let me see, it says your target Resonator cannot be targeted by spells or abilities until end of turn, so that's one of the effects. If you try to Carmilla, which says on enter destroy a Resonator I control, and I Zeke's my Resonator, it can't be targeted and the effect fizzles. In Yu-Gi-Oh! There's kind of a small ruling where if you try to target my card and it's already been targeted, certain cards that say you can't be targeted won't work because I've already been targeted upon like designation of the card. That's not how Forcible works. If I use a card that says give immunity to my card, even if it's in the middle of you targeting me, I'm still going to get the immunity. The only way you can avoid that is if, let's say, you thunder my card, I Zeke's, and then you thunder again, and your second thunder is going to go first because the chase always resolves backwards, which is very similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! And also in the example I used, though, I don't want anyone to think I'm bad. If they were dropping a Carmilla to target my card, I would of course Zeke's the summon of Carmilla over making it immune. I was just thinking of an example. And then yeah, of course, for Apollo Break, the last thing I didn't mention is the draw a card. If they Zeke's the Resonator, and you become immune to spells and Apollo Break no longer affects that card, you still draw the card because once again you apply as much of the effect as you can. So it's very important to note that you would still draw the card. And then Duel of Truth, the last thing I wanted to mention is Forcible does have technicalities when it comes to wording. Duel of Truth says target J Resonator you control and target J Resonator your opponent controls deal damage equal to the attack of each other. And Dracula says when this card deals damage, you take control of your opponent's Resonator. So note that if you use Duel of Truth with Dracula and their Resonator, you would take the card. This counts as dealing damage. So it's very important to know that cards like this do work with Dracula, for example. And also, if you have Dracula and they have, let's say, Hamlin, and you go Duel of Truth with both of them, and they both are to die, of course Dracula has Imperishable, so it would flip over to the Alucard side and go back, but you would still take care of you would still take control of Hamlin. Remember that because of last known information, Dracula was on the field whenever Hamlin was destroyed, and so you take control of it. It doesn't matter if he's also going to be dying, nothing else matters in that moment. Last known information was you used Duel of Truth and Hamlin and Dracula died, but Dracula was on the field when it dealt damage, which means you take control of Hamlin. Also, something to note, I've seen this in tournaments and people have been playing this incorrectly. Like I mentioned with Alucard, where if you're to J activate and respond with the tap effect to do 0 minus 300 and come into the field rested, if you do this effect and you target, let's say, a Gretel and it dies, you don't take control of it for two reasons. First of all, a 0 minus 300 is not damage, it's a gain. Even though it's a negative gain and the Resonator dies, you're not dealing any damage to it. So if a card prevents damage and you do something that gains, it will still go through. Second of all, Alucard is the one doing the 0 minus 300, not Dracula. And the card specifies if Dracula does damage. So even if you guys think that last known information and everything still applies, even if Alucard said deal 300 damage and it wasn't 0 minus 300, and you came into the field and you were now Dracula, it still would not affect because Alucard is the one doing the damage, not Dracula. But once again, it's not damage, it's a gain. It wouldn't apply either way, but make sure you're not trying to steal Resonators with any gains. It has to be pure damage. Moving on to some other form of spells, there's addition fields, which come in a lot of different forms. This is, of course, a castle. I've never really noticed it matter except for a tower is one, and then there's a Resonator that says if you have a tower field addition, you gain like plus 600 or something to defense. These just stay on your field. They're kind of like what field cards are in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not sure what they're called in Magic because I'm not too familiar with Magic, but they would just stay on the field and have a continuous effect for the field. Or there's cards that, like Bloody Moon, say you can activate, pop this card to destroy an addition. That's what this one does. Bloody Moon says pop to destroy a Magic Stone, a dual Magic Stone or a special Magic Stone. And there's activates effects that apply to field spells as well. You play them normally, they just stay on the field. It's almost like a Resonator without a body. And then also to note, which I think is very important that I forgot to mention, is all Resonators in this game have Summon Sickness, which means if you summon it, you can't attack this turn unless it has Swiftness. Something to note is you also can't play activate abilities that require you to tap the churn of summoning, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow, but that does not apply to spell cards. So if this activate ability was pay 1 and tap to banish it and destroy an addition, you'd still be able to do that even if you just played it, whereas a Resonator cannot summon and tap and do the effect. Summoning Sickness only applies to Resonators, it doesn't do anything against spell cards. So then moving on to other form of spells, we have additions. This is Crucifix. It says Resonator with this gains minus 1000 if it's a vampire. Otherwise, it cannot be attacked or targeted by spells abilities your opponent controls. Additions can be equipped to either player's Resonators anyway. So that's why it specifies the first part, because of course you wouldn't want to kill your own vampire. You can equip it to their vampire and kill it. Please remember that because it says Resonator with this gains minus 1000 if it's a vampire, means you cannot equip it to Dracula because it would have to specify J Resonator, but you can kill like a Laura or a Carmilla with this, or if you were to change something's race with like Mujart, the Fantasy Stone, which I'll also get into when I do like a Magic Stone video, you can make it into a vampire and kill it with this, or if you equip it to your card, it would gain immunity to targeting and attacks like it specifies. Otherwise, it cannot be attacked or targeted by spells or abilities your opponent controls. So that's how additions work. They can be on either player. Moving on to Spellchant standbys. This is very confusing because this was updated at one point. The new ruling for Spellchant standbys is you have to pay 2 no matter what it says up here. You have to pay 2 to set this card in your Spellchant standby area. There's no amount of Spellchant standbys you can have. And in order to flip the card, you have to wait a turn, kind of like trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And you have to meet the trigger requirement. So it says anytime is the trigger, which means obviously anytime after you've set it for one turn. So during your opponent's draw or during your next draw, you can already activate it. It says draw a card. It has an additional effect, but we'll keep it simple and just leave it at draw a card. The way Spellchant standbys work now is you can treat them as Spellchant instants if you play the cost. So what happens is if you have this in your hand and you have 1 blue and 1 colorless open, let's say you have a 1 blue, 1 white, and that's what your magic stones look like, and it's your draw. Instead of having to pay 2 to set it, you can easily just pay the blue, play the colors as the white as colorless to just draw a card right away and use this as a Spellchant instant, but you would have to pay the cost. If this costs 10, let's say if it was 5 blue and 5 colorless, you still set it for 2, and if the trigger was still any time, you can flip it. The cost no longer matters because you paid the setting cost, the cost to set it for 2, and you would be able to still draw a card even if it's at 10. So this cost now only applies if you're trying to use it as a Spellchant instant, but if you set the card, you can literally, let's say if you have 10 dark stones, you can set this for 2 because it's 2 colorless to set a standby. That's just the ruling for standbys. And you can flip it at any time and draw a card even if you don't have blue. This color only matters now if you're trying to use it as a Spellchant instant in which you pay the entire cost of the card. So if it says 10, you would pay 10 if you're using it as an instant. But if you set it for 2, you can flip it the second you meet the requirement and you wouldn't have to pay anything else. You've already paid 2. So that's technically how Spellchant instants work. And then lastly is our new addition of Regalias, which are going to be really big, so it's really well to understand this. Regalias are essentially, they're like artifacts in Magic, where it's kind of like another field spell, I guess you could say. It stays on the field and has kind of a blanket effect on your field or your J-Ruler in this game. If you know, it says banish this card, your J-Ruler gains imperishable dischurn. This is an activate ability. Once again, this is something they're trying to clear up so they don't have a lot of wording on this. There's another effect that says discard another card named Excalibur, the God Sword, produce white. This is a continuous effect because it just pretty much means while this card's face up on the field, if you happen to have another Excalibur in your hand, you could just discard it and gain a white mana. So, it's really just important to note that these are little subtle things. If they banish it and you glimpse of Kaguya, they don't gain the effect and it leaves the field. Because banishing this card and then it has a colon means it's the cost. It's already left the field and then that's the activate, and then if you cancel that activate, it's no longer on the field. They don't get to keep their card. But if you try to stop something like this tap effect, which is also an activate, if they go tap to give 200, 200 and you glimpse of Kaguya, it would still apply and it would still be cancelled and this would stay rested, but it wouldn't essentially leave the field. The only time cancelling an activate with glimpse of Kaguya makes it leave the field is if its own effect made it banish, or if somehow a spell was to have an activate and it removed itself from the field. Like let's say the Light Palace, this says activate, pay 1, banish this card. You would pay 1 and banish it, and then you glimpse of Kaguya the chase itself, and then it leaves the field. So Regalias also count as spell cards, so note you can cake zone these, which is very important too because it's like the only way to get rid of it after it hits the field until we get Maribel, which is the Void Ruler. So yeah, that's been pretty much all the card types, and let me do a quick recap. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope that really helped. I try to do my best explaining really complicated cards in the easiest way I could. Like I said, I figured if I explained the complicated ones, it would help you understand the easier ones while not being so confused with all the more complicated ones, if that kind of makes sense. We're going to get 2 more card types, which is Remnant and Stealth in the new set, which I'll talk about when those come out. I didn't want to talk about them without actually having the card in front of me to be able to discuss very thoroughly because they are new. I know it's going to be kind of confusing. I really hope this video helped you guys out. I've been putting it off for a very long time now because I didn't really fully trust myself in doing it how to play because I tend to blurt a lot, and I'm pretty sure you noticed that by the end of this video, but I really hope it's going to help a lot of people because that's really what the focus of this video was. If you guys do have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comment section below. It's really important that I feel like I don't miss anything because I'm going to feel really guilty if somebody watches this video, feels prepared by the end of the week after watching all the videos, and then goes to locals and does something because I said that's how it works, and somebody corrects them because maybe I wasn't clear enough or anything like that. that would make me feel really bad. So if you guys do have any questions about anything specific, please feel free to ask. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, because the 4 videos of how to play is coming this week. I'm going to be doing activates and enters tomorrow. Wednesday will be probably how the chase works in a kind of a more thorough way. I'll go into it. And Thursday and Friday is going to be the battle. I want to make sure everyone understands exactly how to battle. There's also going to be quick cast added in battle. I didn't want to just add it here because it's mainly used in battle, but I'll go through it in the battle video instead. And then Thursday's video will probably just be something else that helps kind of put everything together. I haven't really fully planned out exactly how I'm going to be doing it, but I knew I wanted to do the card types and tomorrow's activate and enters first. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if there's anything I can work on to make it better, and I will catch you guys next time.